It's Big Pharma's way to keep us ill. The chemical theory was never proven, but the drug companies loved it because they can make money off it. They don't want to cure anything. They just want to keep us ill.
Who are you?
I'm different probably than anybody else you ever met. It took me 3 years to write the algorithm to convert the EEG signal to the human range of hearing. In the EEG brain, we can actually see patterns that would tell us if a person's got the capacity to even do the therapy. A lot of therapists believe to the childhood and mommy issues or daddy issues in order to help somebody heal from trauma. We're not looking at the brain yet. We got to look at the organ we're trying to treat. We've been doing neurofeedback for years, not thinking that the brain's inflamed. And if we don't heal the brain, you're going to get limited effectiveness with the neurofeedback. Men, especially veterans, don't want to talk to somebody that's never been in war about what they've gone through. They didn't have neurofeedback when I had my brain injuries. I think I couldn't have been who I am without my brain injury. If you get passionate about something while your brain is rewiring itself, you may just come out with an advantage you would have never had. Depression is foundation for your soul. People can bleed black holes. My goal was to bring science into psychiatry. And if we could do that, that would be the greatest accomplishment. I don't think I'm going to see it in my lifetime, but maybe some of my proteges will take the torch and keep running with it.
What is one of the biggest things that traditional psychiatry gets wrong about the brain? Who are you?
Interesting question. I had a young boy yesterday, actually, a 17-year-old. And after speaking with him for about 30 minutes or whatever, talking about different things, my approach is quite different than most people's because I didn't grow up and go to college and grad school and then get out and start doing practice. I went to the school of hard knocks, Vietnam, Desert Storm, commercial diver, firefighter for 20 years, retired. And then I got into this. I didn't get my PhD till I was almost 52. So that's a difference.
Wow.
Different presentation altogether. And I looked at that boy and I said, I've never had anybody ask me that. That's really a good question. And I said, the only thing I can say is I'm different probably than anybody else you ever met because I look at things different than most people do. I use a wide variety of background experiences to help them kind of come to terms with where they are. There was this story about this guy that was walking down the street on a deep, dark, big black alley. He couldn't hardly see anything, and he fell into this hole. And somebody apparently took the manhole cover off, and he didn't see it and fell down the bottom. This cold, stinking rat showing up place and everything like this. And he hears somebody footsteps coming by, and he says, help me. And this guy came over, and he had this business suit on, and he said, help me, sir. And he said, okay. He took out his prescription pad, wrote him a prescription, and said, come see me in 2 weeks, and threw it down into the hole. He said, no, I need help. A couple hours later, it's getting colder and more smelly, and he's hearing noises he doesn't know what it is. And he starts yelling again, help me. And this guy comes over and looks down the hole. He said, what can I do for you, my son? He had some sort of collar, some sort of priest or something. He said, I need help. He said, took out his notepad. He wrote him a little prayer and said, I'll pray for you, my son, and threw it down the hole and walked on. He said, no, I needed help. Finally, it's getting close to dawn, really terrible. He's getting a little hypothermic, and he anxieties through the roof, and he could see movements like rats. He says, help me. This guy comes by and said, what you need, buddy? He said, I need help. He said, okay. He jumped down in the hole with him. He said, why'd you do that? He said, I've been here. I know the way out. So I said, that's the kind of therapist I'm there. I've been there. I've been down that hole. I've been down that path. As a concussed young guy and playing high school football, flunking out of college, ending up in war in Cambodia and Laos, and then 20 years of firefighting where, from dead kids, people committing suicide and terrible wrecks. I feel really comfortable in very terrible situations for some reason. And so that's why I can get out into the trenches with those folks when they come in and say, okay, I may not have been through your experience, but I've been through a lot of similar experiences, and there is light at the end of the tunnel, and I can show. So that's my story.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, thank you so much for sharing all that. I mean, digging into the research about you, you've definitely lived quite a life with, like you said, the Vietnam War, with the Persian Gulf War. Like those are two very bookend wars that are very, prevalent within our society today. And now you do a lot of work with like neurofeedback, with EEG, with psychiatry, like blending all these different things together to really help people and find the root cause of what's causing these issues. I'm curious, like, how did your background, like in Vietnam, in these early places, like begin to kind of shape who you are today and the way you think about psychiatry in
Well,
today's world?
when I had the concussions, went to the state and knocked out 1.23 grade point average, and it really shook me to my core. And in fact, the first young lady I asked to marry me right before I left for Vietnam sent the ring back in 30 days and said, "No, I can't marry you because you're not smart enough." That's why I got all this crap on the wall behind me. I'm still trying to prove that. Sometimes I feel like it. Sometimes, most times, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And I think that's what was always my drive, trying to figure out why things are the way they are. Why do we feel the way? Why do we react the way we do? And so it's been this incessant desire to try to figure things out. I love to be the detective in trying to figure out what's causing a person's issues. And I love to leave no door unturned in doing that. And with my background, I was first EMT, emergency medical technician, certified and licensed in 1976, and stayed through the fire department, as a firefighter EMT. Again, I was really, really, I love the medical work, and I love figuring out what's wrong with somebody. And you've got barely minutes to make a choice whether that person's going to live or die. If you choose the right thing, you're great. If you choose the wrong thing, you missed, you got to try it again. And so that's been, I guess, what got me to this is just, I love the emergency medicine part of it. And having that background has really helped me with this, because then I can understand. And if I got an unconscious infant, I could have figured this out quick, and it's right now I do this with every single thing. I get so many clues that people miss when they're looking. What's their hand temperature? Are they cold and clammy? What's their pupil dilation? Is it pinpoint or is it blind? And, are they sweating? Are they not? What's the respiration rate? This kind of stuff most people just miss. And it's like, the color of their skin. I'll say, you don't get on the sun very much, or, you look a little yellow. Is that right? And it's that kind of stuff. That's observation. Now, I think that's a major thing, is being able to observe and then catalog, and then kind of make your history with everything you've done prior to say, okay, how can we figure this case out? What are my clues? And it's evident.
Yeah. Yeah. And for the sake of the audience, like when you say like, you're looking for clues at this stage in your life, what is it that you actually do? What is it you're looking for? Who are the people that you help?
Well, I see people as young as 4 and as old as my 85-year-old was just in here this afternoon or this morning. And I'm broad enough based and experienced in enough generations. I know the physiological and neurological differences in the team. And I'm looking for anything that will give me an indication of why they got into my office, because usually they've been everywhere else before they get to me. I'm the last one on the right, they say. And it's interesting that if we keep searching and we keep looking and we keep, I want to see their blood work. I want to see their imaging reports. I want to see their psychiatric, summaries. I want to see all this kind of stuff. I had people do that. So when I'm, working up a case or something, I've got a whole list of things I want to see before we, so that I can come at it from a very broad perspective. I think that's, the most important thing we can do is to look deep into everybody's history and medical history, family history, because that's maybe why I did get my degree, my master's and doctorate in social work. And one thing they teach us there is don't just look at the individual. You got to look at the individual and their environment as well. And what else is contributing? Here in Houston, my gosh, the mold we have right now is wreaking havoc, because Hurricane Harvey was 2017. We had 52 inches of water over 5 days, and the flooding was just immense, and people are just now suffering from terrible mold toxicity. and they don't realize it's not something you see or smell, really. So it's a challenge out here.
Yeah. I would love to dive into more of that because when you got back from, sounds like once you've been a firefighter, you've been through all these wars, you decided to go get your degree in sociology or in sociology,
Social
is that
work.
right? Or in social work. Thank you. In social work, like what went into that decision? Like, why were you going into social work at that period
It
of
was
time?
convenient.
Hmm.
University of Texas Arlington was right next to Station One, and I was stationed at Station One, and I could get standbys and go to class, and then I'd come back and relieve my standbys. There were
Hmm.
times when I was driving the chief, and I take the chief vehicle over to school and park it right out in front of the emergency lane. If I get a call, I'd run out the classroom, run down the chief's vehicle. Before the
Hmm.
trucks got out of the bay, I could be picking him up in front. It was that close. So it was just convenience. It was the social work degree is a 2-year terminal degree, meaning you don't need to have any more of a degree to get licensed as a licensed clinical social worker. And then I went back and got my PhD because I had my mentor, was a UT Southwestern Medical School professor, and he just insisted I had to have my PhD. I said, I don't think I need it. He said, no, I know you need it. You can quit anything, but don't quit your desire for that. So I did it. And I had 9 statistical analysis classes and research classes in my PhD program. I had this professor
Wow.
that was crazy. He was an Indian guy, V.J. Pillai, and he just loved statistics. And in fact, my paper we're just now publishing, he's on it with me because he's published. Why do I need to do the statistics? I'll just get him to be on the paper. So it's
Hmm.
so that's where I got into the research. I got inspired by this one crazy professor who was really passionate about research. And I look at everything now. How can I study it? How can I document? How can I record? So, that was my reason I ended up getting a degree in social work. Not that I do much with social work now, other than just looking at people from a very broad perspective, including family dynamics and everything.
Yeah. How did that degree, and maybe you can talk a little bit like what social work actually is, what is it you were learning at that time, but like how did that degree and you studying social work in that lens factor into the work that you're doing currently?
Not much.
Hmm.
Research and stuff like that in my PhD, yes. But in fact, I
Hmm.
got a crazy book writing. It's the only book I kept from my master's program. Oh, if you can see, Unfaithful Angel.
Unfaithful Angels. Hmm.
They made us read this because they taught us that, or they told us that social workers who go into direct practice are unfaithful angels. We should be out there just in the streets doing community service. So they didn't like us
Hmm.
going into direct practice because that had to do with making money, and they don't want us to make money.
Hmm.
So I was not your traditional social work student. There was only 9% male population in there, and I was older and a veteran and of 2 wars by that time. And I didn't fit the mold particularly. Uh, but again, people do not take degrees seriously. Degrees are
Hmm.
nothing more than permission slips to get to the next level. You're not
Hmm.
going to learn a lot from your degree program. You're going to learn a whole lot after you get out what you decide to specialize. And, there's I got all 4 degrees. I got an AS, a BS, an MS, and a PhD. And AS stands for you know what, shit. BS stands for bull, you know what. MS stands for more the same, you know what. And a PhD stands for power,
Hmm.
fire, and deeper. Just permission slips. They're nothing more. Get those permission slips because without them, you can't go forward. You have to have
Hmm.
either a LPC, means you got to have a counseling master's, or you got LMFT, marriage and family therapist. You got to have you got to have a master's in that, or you can get a licensed clinical social worker, or you can get a clinical psychologist. That's a 4-year degree. Neuropsychologists are probably the top of the heap. If I was going back and could redo my life, if I could do what I'm doing for that 17-year-old yesterday, I'd go back and I say, you really need to look at medical school. You can do it, you know.
Hmm.
And I was wanting to go that direction anyway, but when I found out I couldn't even do college level work and flunked out, I thought I was a dumb wonk and couldn't. So
Right.
that's a difference. People get too hyped up about these degrees. Get the degree. You need the permission slip to go forward. And,
Mm,
to me, social work is convenient, and
mm,
what I do right now, I've probably got another PhD worth of learning in clinical neuroscience. And it's just like, oh my gosh, there's so much out there. But then my background in physical health made all the difference in the world. Right?
mm,
Understanding systems in the body and the blood and the dynamics. My courses I took that really helped were physics, and I even took some post-grad physics courses. My gosh, you talk about flow dynamics and everything else that I've been able to bring in to understand how we could have trouble with, vascular dementia or, aneurysms, this kind of stuff. People don't have a background in physics, you can't understand it from my perspective. So that's been a great class. I wish I had more in chemistry. I wish I had more in some of the classes I blew off, like math, but they were very beneficial. And I wish
mm.
I could go back and talk to myself. And, when I was playing all those hours of football, I counted up, I was averaging throughout the high school years, 35 hours a week playing football. That didn't
Wow.
leave counting off season and season training. And that doesn't leave much time to do anything else. So my focus wasn't
Hmm.
on school. What was, my focus was playing football because I was planning on getting a scholarship, which didn't happen, even though I'm all city, all state, all mixed out. Didn't get a scholarship. So then it was, where did my identity go? It was gone.
Hmm.
I was only a football player. So have a plan B at the time. Have
So how did you end up in Vietnam then?
My draft deferment was about to be pulled from me, and I joined the Air Force to stay out of it. And again, didn't read the fine print of the career field I went to. And didn't read part about forward bear base operations, ended right in the middle of
Mm,
that, supplying the Cambodians and Laotians when we weren't even there. I didn't even have a uniform on. It's one of those Air American type things. Not understanding what kind of situation I was in, but you're young and dumb. It's it's what we get locked with, and so many of us were over there like that. And then when we got back, it was a lot of anger over the way that people treated us. It's disgusting. I wish that's why so many people that came back to the state re-upped and did it again, because even in stateside bases, you don't have the camaraderie, you don't have the brotherhood, you don't have anything like you do when you're in a combat zone.
mm. Yeah, that's interesting to hear you talk about it. So it's almost like people had this very traumatizing experience, come back, and then are treated really poorly. And so it's like at least when they go back, they have something to connect with. They have people who support them. They're not at least treating them like dirt, if
At
anything
least you
else.
know the enemy, they're the ones shooting at you. Hey,
Yeah,
come back over
yeah.
here, and it was pretty rough. Luckily, I held on long enough to I was activated, first unit in the country activated for Desert Shield, and it became Desert Storm. And our welcome home was amazing. Finally got to close
Mm,
that door. Before I
mm,
got activated, I went and bought all the music I was listening to when I was in Vietnam. And so I took myself
mm,
back because we had to go from Air National Guard to active duty Air Force. I thought if I can put myself in the same brainwave state that I was in, I can adapt
mm,
very well, because it was nothing for me to make the shift from civilian firefighter right away back into full officer mode, as I was an officer at the time. And in going into Desert Shield and Storm. And when we got home, I mean, the yellow ribbons were there, the bands were there, everything else. We got the welcome home we never got. And that's what's had
mm.
down now with the conflicts we've had since Afghanistan. There's no welcome home for those guys. But we finally got them. And I know what that must have been like for the World War II vets, which my dad was going to get that welcome home. Closed a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
doors.
No,
Closed a lot of doors. I mean, a lot of pain.
yeah. I'm glad. Yeah, I had an Iraq War veteran on not too long ago, my friend Latham, and he just shared about his experience, especially because it was such a war that like I noticed like for myself, like I felt super disconnected from. Like we didn't really know much about what was going on there or the people. And I had heard so few stories, and to just hear a little bit of the things that he went through there and his experience coming back, and then he actually had a really profound transformation going to a music festival out here, which I'm almost kind of curious your perspective on. Because I know one of the things you've talked about with people who have like PTSD and TBI is this the importance of not just going straight into like talk therapy or any sort of treatment, but ideally kind of looking at the EEG of the person and kind of figuring out how healthy is the brain? Is it ready for this kind of treatment or not? Can you talk about more about that?
Sure. And having experience from the user side as well, you best not pop that egg open if the person's not ready and doesn't have the skill set in order to self-regulate themselves back to some sort of homeostasis. And people that are there's such an excitement or romance for therapists to get into trauma therapy and that have never been through a trauma in their life. And it's like, you guys don't understand. This is dangerous work. You can really hurt somebody. You can cause somebody to become suicidal if you crack that egg open too quickly and you can't get jacked back in the box, basically. And I've been working with trauma for a while, not as my primary intervention, but people who have been traumatized, I should say that. And it's in the EEG, electroencephalogram, we can actually see patterns that would tell us if a person's got the capacity to even do the therapy. And most often, they're not sleeping worth a darn. They've got brain inflammation, this particular pattern we just identified, spindling excessive data. They've got hypervigilance. They can't hardly close their eyes. They're always scanning. And you got to pick up on these things in order to effectively help them and help them make this idea. So when we do neurofeedback, what I like about this is because we can help make the brain more functional so that the brain's got the capacity to do the therapy. And then everything seems to come natural. It doesn't have to be forced. Men, who are the ones I primarily work with trauma, they don't like to talk anyway. We hate therapy. That's the last thing on our minds. You don't want to talk about anybody with anything, especially veterans don't want to talk to somebody that's never been in war about what they've gone through. We just don't do that. We just can't talk. You ever kill anybody? In their question, it's ridiculous. So, and when it does come, my approach is it's going to come naturally, and there's something to process in there. We can process it. But it's, I don't think that we have to go back, like a lot of therapists believe, to the childhood and mommy issues or daddy issues in order to help somebody heal from trauma. I just don't think that you have to dig like that. Yes, we're supposed to gain insight from what terrible experiences we went through, but it's kind of fascinating that we tend to do everything to escape our dragons or our demons and run away from them, and that's the wrong thing to do. You got to use approach coping methods, not avoidance coping methods like drugs and alcohol and video games or whatever to get away from. But you got to be able to approach your demons, but you got to be able to have a sense of self before you do this, because that's what the main work in therapy is to help the person reattach to themselves. And that's what a lot of focus has not done. In my opinion, a lot of therapy sessions, it's all about, well, let's talk about your history, mom and dad and everything. It's like, no. Guys don't want to come into therapy and dig up old stuff. Guys want to fix something. That's what we do, is fix. And my job is to kind of give them solutions. So maybe, why don't you change your look at it from a little bit different perspective. What did you gain from that experience? Then kind of weird. It's like, you gain from every negative experience. What's different about you now than it was before? And that's why I got my healing film. And there's a whole lot I gained from all the negative experiences. In fact, if it wasn't for the negative experiences, I wouldn't be right here now. So you got to learn to appreciate your life's journey, because unless you appreciate it, you're just going to waste a bunch of time, energy, and money running away from.
For you personally, what was the like hardest thing for you to learn to appreciate that you appreciate now?
I would say it would have to go back to the way that people were really treated us after we got. I'd never been treated like that in my entire life. And that was a real eye.
Yeah.
So
Are you open to sharing like just more detail about like what that was like coming back for you?
shunned. Um, they told us to change our uniform as soon as we hit the Air Force bathroom. I mean, the airport bathroom. Of course, they could see our haircuts. Obviously, were military and stuff like that. There were people that were spitting on the street. Just it was terrible. Some of the things that did. Uh, those signs put up in the people's front lawns: keep all dogs and airmen off my property. Oh gosh, and just the whole attitude. It wasn't our fault. We weren't the people creating the war. We rallied the pawns at war.
Right.
And I think that the war has changed. There's a book by Pharma, I think it is, Why Sex Matters, and it talks about how wars changed years. That in medieval times, it was the kings and the knights that were leading the charge. They were on the front lines. Well, then the invention of the gun changed everything, because now some little squirrely guy could sit behind a tree and kill the biggest king there was. And so they said, no, we got to get behind the lines, and all you little pawns go out there and fight the war. And so when they did that, the general stayed way back, and all the little grunts like I that had to be on the front lines, it was like there's no investment. And now we got the industrial military complex, making millions off of our wars that are useless. I think that's the big thing I've got a problem with right now is worthless wars. We don't give anything. We don't gain anything. We haven't won a war since World War II. And it's just frustrating to see so many young guys, killed and maimed uselessly, worthless. And so that has given me best appreciation, the greatest appreciation for living. I hit 72 last night. I am so glad I got this deal worked out with God. Give me another day and help as many as I can. So far, He doesn't want me. I kind of like that. But I think that's the biggest thing. Appreciation for life itself. Appreciation. We don't have a guarantee. It could be snapped away from us in a second. Surviving 2 wars, surviving the fire department for 20 years and all the runs we went on. I shouldn't be here right now. As a commercial diver, some of the things I got in, I was an underwater demolition expert. I did some crazy stuff and survived everything. So God must have had a plan. And I'm here and I'm just doing the best I can with what I've got.
Yeah. You've mentioned God a few times, and I've interviewed a couple different neuroscientists with different perspectives on God. I'm curious, do you actually believe in God?
Yeah, I'm probably more spiritual than religious. I think religion separates what spirituality unites, in my opinion. So in that regard, I do believe that there is a force at work. I love to come at it from a quantum physics perspective, because if you can come at it from a quantum physics perspective, yes, everything's witness is changed, and understanding some of those connections and everything else. And why do things happen like they happen? Why did that young 17-year-old end up coming into my schedule yesterday? That kid, his life's going to be changed, and I think my life's going to be changed. It's really unique. When he asked me the same question, who are you? As he was just baffled by, he's never talked to anybody like that before. And I'm going, it's a very interesting question. So I kind of lost track of where we were going on that conversation. And lost another direction, but
Yeah, just whether or not you believe in God.
And I think that's I do believe that we have to look that there's something more powerful than us, whether we call it God or Yahweh or whatever, I don't care. But that I do think the power of prayer is powerful. I do think that karma is real. That's, for every action, there's an equal opposite reaction. There's both physics with karma. I do think if you put out good energy, and good energy will come back. If you put out negativity, it won't come back. If we had time, I'll tell you a story about that. Real world patient that I had was a warlock and a hedonist. It was quite hilarious. But I believe people.
Can you say more? I would love to.
No, I got you.
I've never heard a
tagged
story
into
of a
this.
warlock.
Okay, all right. Tell you the story. I love stories. Let's say this guy's name was George. George is a 54-year-old male, long hair, scraggly beard, looks like a hobo, but he's a very successful vending machine person. He puts vending machines into the 3rd Ward, 4th Ward, 5th Ward here in Houston, and he goes and collects his change. And he was late one day, and he's soaking wet, and he comes in, and he said, "What happened to you?" He said, "Well, my windshield wipers weren't working. There was a storm outside, and I got into the parking garage and turned off my car, and the windshield wipers came on. I couldn't get them to come off." I said, "Whoa, sound like you had a bad day." He said, "Yeah." He said, "My wife hates me, my kids hate me, and the other day I was out collecting money, and I need your advice on something. I need to go buy a gun because this little black boy came up to me and asked me for a quarter, and I told him to go screw himself, and he stabbed me." I said, "George, what do you know of black holes?" I knew he was well read. He said, "Well, black holes are anomalies in space, and it happens when a star collapses, and the sun would have to collapse to 4 miles in diameter, and the Earth would have to collapse to the size of a quarter in order to create gravitational forces found in a black hole." I said, "You just got the Scientific American too." He said, "Yeah, I like that magazine." I said, "Yeah, I read it as well." I said, "George, I believe people can read black holes." He said, "How so?" I said, "Well, you've seen people walk into the room and they light up. And then, funny how they can do that. They don't have to say a thing. You can see people walk into a room and they'll just crash it. It's just all of a sudden you can feel the negative energy." And I said, "I think people, the more they're self-centered, the more they're focused on themselves, which is more dense, the more negativity they attract towards themselves. The people who walk in that are just giving energy out there, that just do things because it's a thing to do, the right thing, the polite thing to do, hold a door for a female and going in a door into an office or something. All these things are projecting positives. So I tell you what you do, and he was a self-proclaimed hedonist. I said, "You go home this weekend and Friday night, Saturday night, go out, don't tell your wife and kid where you're going, drink as much as you want to, smoke as much pot as you want to. And next Tuesday, when you come in for your appointment, I don't want you to be bitching about all the negative things that are happening in your life, because that's part of the cost of being in a black hole." He said, "Well, I have been a pretty selfish bastard, haven't I?" I said, "Pretty much." Well, that's my black hole story about that. The spirituality. Seriously, if we are out there trying to do good things will happen. We're going to have bad things too. But if we're out there trying to be self-centered and it's all about me and not about my wife, not about the kids, not about anything else, and I can't believe you did this to me or you treat me like this, then that's probably a black hole, and you're going to have negative things come to you all the time.
Yeah. I'm curious, because that's a really, I think profound and enlightening take on spirituality. And I'm curious, is any of your work that you've done with neuroscience, with looking at the brain, the EEG, all of these, over 100 presentations and papers that you've been a part of, like, has that factored into any of your current thinking around spirituality?
Well, I see a person's EEG, and I guess after you look at 10 to 20,000 of them, you can start to get a feel of where the person's at. And there is an irritated looking EEG pattern that always fits those that have the most negative energy about them. And I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg, but there is something there. And then I see these patterns. I saw this pattern one time of this 14, 15-year-old girl, and I said, no, she's probably 15 or 16. I said, you're your EEG, your alpha is beautiful. I don't think I've ever seen one so pretty. I said, do you happen to be musically inclined? And she told me she went to the HSPBA, Houston High School for Performing Arts here in Houston, and she played whatever instrument it was and everything else. And I said, it shows, because that alpha yours is absolutely wonderful. Its timing is excellent. And she said, well, and both my parents are orchestra musicians. I said, well, that makes sense. It fits perfectly, you know. And I've been working on music for the longest time, on why brains sync with what they hear. It's been curious. And even though they have different cultures, different languages, and everything else, the same music played elicits the same emotions in everybody. And it has to do something with the brain. So music does actually help the brain become synchronized. In fact, I got a neuroscience thing this morning I downloaded about Hertz frequencies and how that's, can help with the brain's operation. And we know about the Vivaldi effect or the Mozart effect, and using that type of music as background music in order for people to learn better because it produces a certain frequency. It took me 3 years to write the algorithm to convert the EEG signal to the human range of hearing so it would be aesthetically nice. And I've got actually a guy from works with Timmy Sync that's working on the project right now for me. It's been sitting there since 2010. Haven't done anything with it, but I thought if we could hear our own brains aesthetically correct, then we can, I could do diagnostics in a heartbeat auditorily, because you're so much more acute in auditory faculties than you are visual. I can hear my wife's voice in the crowded room, and I don't see she's there, and I know it's her, but I couldn't tell it from a graph of her voice. I couldn't tell that, so it's like, I really think that the sounds and everything else. I'm working with a group in Calgary on a study that we're trying to put together in Lowe's Hope Hospital for females up there, because we're trying to reduce the births. We're trying to improve the postpartum outcomes of children, because they've had a big surge of autistic children with autism due to this wildfire smoke up there. And we're looking at using frequencies treatment during their pregnancy in order to improve the outcomes, which is totally logical to me. I can see it. If we lower the stress level of the mothers, improve their ability to get back to some sort of state of homeostasis, I think we'll have better outcomes altogether. So I'm working with a lot of different projects all over the world right now, and because I love to set up research stuff. It's just I have fun doing. So we're all connected in some way, shape, or form. And I think that component or frequencies or something. When I wrote that algorithm, I was able to show that middle C is in the alpha range. And so it's interesting how I laid the whole thing out on a piano and with all the keys and the frequencies and everything else. And when I converted it and used my algorithm I wrote, it matches so perfectly. And then I was able to lay the color, how light is broken down into different colors and how the frequency differences. And I was able to overlay that with the with the frequencies. And it does, you're talking about the 0 C's. Well, that color is perfectly embedded into the very relaxed state of alpha, which is where it should be, and then the red at the very end of the spectrum, that would be more the beta, the high beta, the excitatory. So when you're looking at concerts and you're looking at listening to music, and you said you went to 56 concerts?
Yeah, 54
in a year?
In a year.
Gosh. And I would be interested, and that could be a good analysis of your brain just by knowing what kind of music you like, because that tells me what kind of EEG you probably have.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to get into that if you want to
People
dance for that.
Music that either supports something they don't have or calms something that they need to be calmed. And it depends on that. And so if you want to do, I did a study once upon a time, Hurricane Kid. Had nothing to do for 5 days, but I was beta testing a new statistical package from SPSS. And they had a new program called cluster analysis. And I said, I didn't know how many types of brains there are. And so I had 125 in my data archive. I had the tables on. This is how obsessive I can get. And I said, how am I going to get a fingerprint of the brain? Well, if I take all 19 lines and I aggregate them into one, average it, then I get rid of the outliers. So then I could have a pattern of the brain. And so I did that with all 125. Then I ran it against cluster analysis and back and forth. I came about with 18 different clusters. And I said, okay. So I knew all the people because I've collected all the EEG data. When I put them all into their clusters, the similarities blew my mind. It was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. So the brain pattern a person has, there are brain patterns. And I think there's that many different patterns because we need people to do that many types of different jobs and things. I think, well, one thing I started also notice was, boy, I can tell you which patterns shouldn't go together and which patterns should, because you don't want a high theta with a low beta. I mean, a high theta with a low theta, because that's your obnoxious, egotistical, narcissistic guy with a poor, pitiful me female, and that doesn't work. Sometimes they do go together, but it still doesn't. So that whole concept about doing something like that, and I thought, the more similar your music tastes are, the more compatible you are, because your brains like that kind of music. It's kind of like a clearinghouse of, if somebody likes totally different music than you do, that usually doesn't last that long.
Well, and I think it's so funny because it's so common as like a first dating question, right? It's like, oh, what kind of music do you like? And almost like initially you can be like, if somebody like, I remember I was talking with this one woman for a long time, and at some point she just said like, oh, I don't like techno. And I'm a huge like EDM fan. I was like, okay, maybe you don't like techno specifically, but she just referred to like all of EDM as techno, which is like a specific subgenre within that. And I just remember being like, I don't even want to like talk to this person anymore, because there's clearly such a difference in how we experience the world that like I lost my interest in her like almost immediately. So I think you're pretty spot on with that.
Just a little way to clear out the dead wood, I guess,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm curious because like it's funny because I just talked to Zingara, who is a really famous DJ, and she was giving a talk at this festival that I went to. And she was talking about how she has been paying attention to a lot of the artists that she looks up to, and how they'll use specific like key ranges or certain frequencies to actually create and evoke specific effects. And so like she talked about like I think Closey uses a lot of her songs in the key of F, which like actually produces a lot of like this like kind of heart-centered feeling and experience around. Has there been done a lot of like research around that kind of topic and idea overall for people to look into, or is it still mostly untapped?
There's not been a lot, but there's another book out here. I've got in my library over here. It's called Your Brain on Music. Excellent book. And it talks just about that stuff. And it talks about the frequencies and why they trigger certain emotions and stuff. But no, there's not much information out there on it, and there's not been a lot of research, because I think the people who are more musically inclined are neuroscientists, and vice versa, and so it's something I think is very fascinating, and I think it's a wide open market right there. But we got to understand that, like Beethoven playing Midnight Sonata, for instance, that was done in such a key and was done lower, and it has that haunting, effect. And he created that piece of music when he was totally deaf, because his father used to beat him in the side of the head until he lost his hearing. And so he put his head down the piano and he could feel the vibrations, and then was playing it strictly from the vibrations. And so just an interesting story, but, and you can probably feel in the piece his anguish and everything else after losing his hearing when he was such an accomplished composer. It's just remarkable when you think about how the stuff gets created. People are all depressed about being depressed. Depression, that's a book I read, Sir Thomas More, Care of the Soul. Chapter 4 is a gift of depression. I read that and I went, what is the gift of depression? How can depression be a gift? And it's really interesting. He stated in that book that depression is foundation for your soul. When you get into a very depressed state, that's what inspires most of the music, literature, everything out there that's artistic is, depressed people. 95% of music, art, literature, paintings all come from very depressed. 5% comes from those very much in love, and the rest have writer's block. And that's why Taylor Swift has it down to a science. When she wants to write a new song, she just breaks up with a boyfriend, goes through a divorce. And so, this woman's a genius. I can't wait to see what the song is when Kelsey breaks up. Oh my gosh. This would be wonderful. Just saying.
My God.
Thanks, man.
That's super funny. Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated. Like I had a friend come on the show who she talks about, like, she actually used EDM music to reduce panic attacks. And her explanation, I'm kind of curious your perspective on this, was that a lot of EDM will have I say competing rhythms within themselves. So you'll have like maybe a bass line that's moving at a steady pace, where then the melody is kind of bouncing and dancing all over the place. And for her, it was almost like that, like, because she's at least self-diagnosed with like ADHD. So there's like, for her, it's like it just gave this like kind of steady piece, and the other part was almost like tickling her brain is the way that she described it, and kind of giving her that kind of relaxing sensation that was like working both things that allowed her to be present and stopped her panic attacks while she was driving that she was dealing with for a year or two.
Let's talk about panic attacks. Panic attacks
That's super funny. Yeah, I mean,
are highly correlated with spindling excessive beta, which is just a high beta activity that has a spindling morphology to it, usually from some sort of inflammation, prior illness. COVID brain fog is spindling excessive beta. Head injury, spindling excessive beta. A lot of things can cause that into a person, and it really wrecks your sleep. But it's a high frequency beta scream, basically. It's like fingernails on a chalkboard. I look at EEG and I just go, oh, that hurts my head just to listen to it. And I'm just watching EEG. And so when you get that beat, you get that rhythm, that's your alpha. Your alpha rhythm is the conductor of your brain. It's what gets every place into the right place at the right time. Usually people that have the spindling excessive beta, they have very core alpha rhythm. So beat, you think of your brain like an orchestra. A beat, the thalamocortical projection system that produces the alpha, gets in sync with that beat. And so it can let the other stuff go around, because then the processing of it, getting the timing and everything else, you can observe the flowery stuff around it as long as you got the consistent beat, and it helps you center yourself. That makes some sort of sense, because I can totally understand what she's saying with that. And we do recommend, that people that have a lot of anxiety and everything else, they probably should, pick some music, not with a very rapid beat, because we don't want to be into the beta range, and that's in your higher keys on your keyboard. We want to be more into the alpha, sometimes into the theta, just to be a little bit lower, but it needs to be that consistent beat, because our brains will sync it with that beat. And that's, you tend not to have the panic attacks, because it does stabilize the brain while you're enjoying the rest of the runs throughout the music. As long as you've got that rhythm, you can sync with it.
Yeah, I feel like I don't have the skill set to fully explain it to you right now, but I would love to show you some bass music, because it's so weird and different and interesting and unique. Like often it goes on what's referred to like as dubstep, so it's like a kind of a deep
or highly correlated
reggaeton style beat as like kind of the basis as the bottom. But then like on top of it, I mean, it goes everywhere. I mean, you're talking about Mozart, you're talking about video game music, you're talking about rock and roll. Like a great, bass artists like Subtronics or Excision are going to blend almost the full spectrum of music into one piece. And it's nuts. So I would love to show you at some point and just get your take on, I don't know what it says about the brain, if anything, from all of the variety.
All you got to do is listen to Phil Collins live. Stephen Lukather, the bass player, big long bearded guy. My wife knew him once upon a time. Excellent bass player. He makes that song, and it's his rhythm that guides the whole thing. And then when Collins, fed off of that. And so I think that, I totally understand what you're saying, that the bass player really is the one that sets that underlying heart rhythm. And then everything can go from that. And that's just a perfect example. That live concert he did that you can still get on YouTube. It's just, I like looking at that stuff too. 'Cause that's where the whole card of music is right there in that bass player.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that analogy. I guess when I kind of zoom back into your personal life and your connection with so much of this work, like you, at least online, I was talking a lot about how your own experience with TBI and PTSD really was spurred you on to a lot of the work that you're doing. Did you run into like the benefits of EEG and this kind of work while you were dealing with PTSD and TBI at the time? Like, how did those two things intersect for you?
Well, when I was in grad school, we got the pig subjects, and I was always gravitate towards PTSD and traumatic brain injury because it was a lived experience, and I understood what some of the people were saying and some of the writings and stuff that I had to write on. And I just so getting into the EEG world in 2005 when I did my first EEG, I looked at that garbage goop on the map and I said, I don't have a clue what this is all about. This is crazy. And I looked at brain maps and I said, I don't have a clue. So I had enough sense to know that I didn't have a clue with what to do with it. And I sent every case off to be analyzed initially by Dr. Jonathan Walker, neurologist. And interestingly, the really thing that he kept coming back with probably in the first month or two was isolated epileptiform discharges. And they were spike and wave activity that was in about 30% of the cases I saw of people that failed medication. I thought, this is interesting. That's like seizure activity that may never produce a convulsion, but it sure messes with brain function. And so it was like that. I kind of like always gravitate towards the worst possible thing. I'm going to see something like this big spike and wave hit. I'm going, whoa. And then I see it hitting this part of the brain and we're seeing these behaviors. Could they be connected? What medicine is he on? Well, that medicine lowers seizure threshold. So that started me down to see how we could actually look at the brain and the presenting issues. And in brain injury, for instance, we talk about that highly correlated with this type of activity because you've had, if you think about, if you got power lines that are broken, they hit the ground, they're arcing. Well, they're trying to reconnect. And so when you get a brain injury, you get bruising, usually in the temporal lobes, the bruising is escape of the little blood from the microcapillaries, and that has to be resealed. So the brain instructs, the part of healing is instructing all the neurons around that seeping capillary to die and encapsulate to reseal the blood-brain barrier. And so now you got neurons that used to go through that area, comes and hits this lesion, scarring, and they have to jump the gap. And so that's spike is actually all about is they've got disconnections in there. In the case of brain injury, that's what can create it. And those jumps like that are not typical. So what we do in the neurofeedback is set up a set of protocols so that I can encourage that activity to go around the lesion and not try to go through it. You can't go through dead stuff. You can't go through a scar. So, and doing that, I think that's why we have the best results when we look with brain injury, because we actually are able to rewire the brain. We can't fix it because you can't remove the lesion, but you can convince the brain to take an alternative route. And when it lays on alternative pathways, you've reconnected it. Now here's something people don't talk much about. After doing so many of these cases and having so many amazing things happen after I worked a lot of brain injuries, and because I had my own brain injury, you take the brain as originally born, you have long runs from posterior to anterior of neurons. And part of growing is pruning these runs, symmetrically pruning these runs. All right. So when you get a brain injury, these bands, they fracture. A big old oak tree in the middle of the forest gets struck by lightning. a set of these neurons. Now, if you take the tree was nice and symmetrical because there was nothing affected in the middle of the forest, but when it got struck by lightning, things got shattered. The next spring, that tree is back growing, but it looks atypical. Definitely. Your brain's the same way. My left posterior temple looks atypical, but it's completely rewired. And I tell people all the time, you want to heal a broken brain? 150 hours of college struggle will rewire any brain type. Just saying. So they didn't have neurofeedback when I had my brain injuries. And so, but I kept thinking, so this is how my brain goes off on tangents. What makes people different that were the great scientists, the great composers, the great everything? I pondered this for years. I used to think it was, most of them are from between Mediterranean Sea north to below Ireland, Britain. So in that little time, I think it was maybe something to do with longitude or that. I don't know. Nothing ever good happened will come from the Sahara. So, but then I thought, that doesn't make sense. And I finally said, maybe it's that the people who became these geniuses had discretionary time. Einstein, theory of relativity, was created in a post office he worked in because he had all this idle time in Germany. He had a lot of idle time. And I said, and look at all the other ones that can get do the writing and everything else. They were in the royal class. Maybe that's it. Now I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense because we have trust fund countries that produce absolutely nothing. So that doesn't, they got all the idle time in the world, and that doesn't make no sense either.
True.
So I came up, okay, maybe it's that they were all aliens because their brains aren't wired the same way everybody else's are. So they could be aliens, implants, macular resection or something. And I said, well, there's going to be another possibility. I said, maybe they were all head injured. And so I started research. Now, a lot of these people, look at Edgar Allan Poe. He was head injured from STDs. Well, Mozart was definitely brain injured. We know Beethoven was. And if you go back and look at this, these head injuries. So I had this one, reason I came to that conclusion is I had this one lady that was 28 years old. I was doing neurofeedback with her. She was, when she was 26-year-old, she went through a windshield, got a terrible head injury. Wasn't particularly artistically inclined until after the head injury, she started seeing colors more vibrantly. Now she's one of the world's leading artists in doing storefront big canvases. She does them all over her driveway. She's really talented. And I thought, there are instances where people can get brain injury that may develop some sort of particular, things that they could do that they never could do before. I don't recommend hitting yourself in the head. Well, head pretty good skill, but it's a thought.
Yeah.
So when we have a brain injury, and this is maybe where my brain injury took me, why it led to my path, is that I have the ability to pick out things that are really out of place and most people can't see. It bothers me. Why is that like that? Whether it's a patient presenting a certain way or whether it's an EEG or something like this does not make sense. And my little bit of OCD goes down that path and says, I got to figure this out. This is not right. That shouldn't be there like that. And so that's how I think I got rewired atypically, is that now I can see things from a completely different perspective than anybody else can. And I tell every one of my brain injured patients, and we're getting ready to start a concussion treatment center here at Houston Neuroscience Brain Center, and we call it CORE. And I think it's going to be phenomenal because I want all these young guys to know and young girls to know that it doesn't have to be the end of your life when you get a brain injury. If you get passionate about something while your brain is rewiring itself, you may just come out with an advantage you would have never had. And that gives them a little bit of hope. We could do something. Now, if you go down the other path and get into drugs and alcohol and poor pitiful me and all that kind of stuff, you will trash that brain and you won't be able to ever come back from it. But if you get passionate about something, and one thing I've always had in my life is whatever I'm doing, I get passionate about it, whether it's military or fire department or commercial diving. I loved what I did, and I love what I do today. So I think that's what I like to tell people with brain injuries. Don't write yourself off. You may just needed this for a reason. I think I couldn't have been who I am without my brain injury, So there is hope out there.
Yeah. Yeah. When you started getting into EEG and kind of looking at all these different things, like, did you find like a different level of like hope with this kind of work compared to what you found through the traditional methods, I guess, that you were especially learning with like social worker phones? Like what drew you so much to EEG and this world in particular?
Well, it's objective. It's not subjective. We can take psychometrics all the time and how do you feel and all this other kind of stuff, but it's just subjective. I wanted something I could measure that shows before we started interventions, after we started intervention, and I do a subjective analysis during the C checklist, and it's 296 questions. By the time they get to the second EEG, which is 20 sessions later, I do a top 30 negative answers they had and give it to them again. And usually I see between 10 to 20 to 30% decrease in symptoms in 20 sessions. And I'm going, good. So we got an objective measure of improvement, our subjective measure of improvement based upon our self-report. And then I look at the EEG, and sometimes I see little tiny changes, positive changes, and big subjective changes. Sometimes I see big EEG changes and tiny subjective changes. And, if I do an EEG and looks like a good case and a good candidate, and we do the 20 sessions, we get absolutely nothing, we've missed something. Guaranteed we missed something. Yeah. I need to see the blood work. I need to check the toxicology. I need to check for mold. We've missed something. And so that's why I try to get that stuff up front as much as I can. But that's what drew me in, is being able to have something quantifiable that says, okay, look at this EEG. And I show people our EEGs all the time. They're not that complicated, but we can definitely work with that on how we can make this improve what we're doing.
Yeah, the biggest contributions, or one of the bigger contributions, I shouldn't say biggest, but that you made was kind of identifying some of the, brainwave signatures that indicates like medication's not going to work for someone. And a lot of the work that you've really contributed to, it sounds like, has been around like helping psychiatrists or anybody else who's giving medication to figure out, is this medication going to be helpful or not, based on kind of the root cause of this person's symptoms. What is like one of the biggest things that you find like traditional psychiatry gets wrong about the brain when it's looking at it?
Well, probably going to get in trouble with this, but this is my soapbox. Pharmaceutical companies back in the late 60s and 70s, they came up with this chemical imbalance theory of medication, and that took them off into a direction of, oh, well, if you got anxiety or depression, you must have a serotonin issue, so we got to put a serotonin reuptake inhibitor to make you feel better. And so they're basing it, on that premise. Well, the chemical theory was never proven, was never substantiated, but the drug companies loved it because they can make money off of it. So the psychiatrists base everything on the DSM. And if you have such and such and such and such symptoms, that can get you classified as whatever diagnosis, which then opens up the book for pharmaceuticals to say on label, for this type of issue or diagnosis that you have are these sets of medications. And so that's my biggest thing with psychiatry. You're basing everything on symptoms. If I went into my doctor 150 years ago and said, Doc, I'm going blind, I'm getting fat, and my toes are tingling, he had diagnosed me with blindness, obesity, and toe rot. They didn't have the test for diabetes yet. And so that's where we are in psychiatry. We're not looking at the brain yet, and that's my last paper in 2024 was, we got to look at the organ we're trying to treat, because I've identified the 4 primary reasons why medications fail in psychiatric medications fail. And then if you know why they fail, you can know what to do. I'm the only one that's ever studied why medications fail. Try to find another article outside of mine. It was in 2014 when I wrote the initial study on 379. This one's on 1,233. And it makes total sense. So we're not looking at the organ. Why does it fail? Why do people have bad side effects? And my simple paper, I wrote my 14-year investment of time paper, it's pretty obvious that you can see if a psychiatrist had this on all refractory cases, on all cases that failed multiple defensive medications, at least they would have some answer to why their prior medications that went according to Big Pharma should have worked and didn't work. And so that's the big thing. And that's why I try to help in all these cases, stay in my lane. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not an MD. I wear lab coat because I don't want to, since COVID, we started that implementation so we didn't have to take this stuff home to our families. And so we leave them here, put them in an ozone room. But it's an interesting thing about the medications, and I really wish we could get this out there. I got a copy sent to RFK through a mutual friend, and hopefully we can try to get more evidence-based prescribing than basically prescribing by symptoms. And we need to know that prescribing by symptoms, 20 to 25% effectiveness, maybe 30, and that commercial, when your antidepressant doesn't work, just had Abilify. Stick an antipsychotic on top of somebody without even know why the antidepressant didn't work? That doesn't even make logical sense. They sell more money. Medication failure is how they make their profit. So they've known we could do better with targeting the medication, but if they target medication better, they sell less medication. So there goes the thought. So it's Big Pharma's way to keep us ill. They don't want to cure anything. They just want to keep us ill. That's why they hate hyperbaric medicine. That's why they hate neurofeedback. That's why they hate photobiomodulation, modulation, any TMS. They can't make money off of that. You fix it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you mentioned obviously there's like the big pharmacological like industry that's like kind of going against the grain with this stuff. But what do you feel like why do you think that gap exists there? Because it seems like with neurofeedback, with EEG, we've known so much about root cause of like brain stuff, at least in some areas for quite some time. And yet I'm shocked at how few psychiatrists use it. I'm shocked by how few of my friends who've been diagnosed with various issues or conditions have ever heard of an EEG even. What do you think we have to do to actually get to that point where it's something that is a form of established regular science to actually be looking at and measuring the brain?
Let's say the big issue we have initially is we had no funding to do neurofeedback research. It was all done happenstancely by people who were not researchers. They did what they could to get it out there. And there was some fair quality research, but no really good quality research for decades. It started in the 70s. We should have had better research. There was no big pharma going to support our research, so it was all on shoestring budgets. And like I say, all my studies I've done so far have been not funded at all. And so I think that's number one. And number two, psychiatrists are, and most medical doctors, and I say this with a little bit of apprehension, they're stuck in the year they graduated because that's the last time they read research. Or you know how technology is now, research is busted every minute. And if you're not on top of it, you're not on top of it. So the industry out there has not read the reports. They have not understood the advantages. They only see the negative ones. They don't see the positive. And yet there's so much we can do, but because it's not in their wheelhouse. Now, me trying to get into an American Psychiatric Association, do a presentation, even when I got a neurologist with me, very tough. They don't want to hear it. All the EEG work, my mentor, Nash Boutros, he's a great guy. He's just retired. He's got out of it now, but he tried for years to get this EEG into psychiatry. That was his goal. And as a psychiatrist and a neurologist, he couldn't open that door either. And so we have a lot of mainstream psychiatrists, and even psychologists, and that just don't know enough about it, don't believe in it, think it's still voodoo medicine. It came out in the 70s when it got wrapped up with pop psychiatry or psychology and discounted immediately as, voodoo medicine. So it's, we're fighting a hard battle. We're winning I feel sorry that I can't offer our services to the areas that really need it. I've tried to get into the state to work with CPS to help them with guiding medications, and I would teach them. I tried to get into the VA to set up a study to show how we could improve their outcomes by using EEG, QEEG analysis for medication. And they weren't interested, or they want to give me a job. I said, I want to give this away. I'm not going to charge you. I just want to help you set up a program so you could test these things and should see. And so the big bureaucracies, it's just, you can't break into them. It's just mainstay. It's the way it has been. Thankfully, I think RFK is up there trying to shake them up and see more evidence-based than just symptoms-based prescribing going on. But we'll see. But, my job, my goal, my life, since I got into this field, was to bring science into psychiatry. Hard science. That's why it's called the soft science, because it's all based on symptoms. It's all based on what you tell them. And if we could do that, that would be the greatest accomplishment. I don't think I'm going to see it in my lifetime, but maybe some of my proteges will take the torch and keep running with it. But right now, we're just guided by big pharma, and we got the best acute care in the world and lousiest chronic care in the world health system. Terrible.
Yeah. You mentioned RFK a couple times, and a lot of people would have a lot of different feelings, I guess, and thoughts about him in one way or direction or shape or another. Like some people claiming that a lot of the claims that he's making are kind of like pulling science away from where it ought to go in different directions. Like, do you have a take on RFK you feel comfortable sharing overall? Or
I listen to NPR because that's really the only news station. I tried the Fox and it just didn't work for me. They're not as professional, but I listen to that all the time, and they only present the one side. They don't admit that how the CDC lied, how the CDC kept information from us. I mean, don't point a finger at somebody when you got three fingers pointing back at you. You did worse things than that in misguiding us through this whole COVID thing. I was a scientist. I was reading the science. I was saying this is BS. They can't be saying these things. The evidence is there. And yet, any doctor that got up there and tried to do that, he was almost tarred and feathered, ran out of profession because he was challenging. And they would have fact checkers that they don't even have a degree in medicine, fact-checking Harvard medicine doctors and telling them that they were wrong and everything and pulling all their stuff down. Don't talk to me about, that kind of stuff until you can admit the CDC has been falsifying things for the longest time. That was not right. And so I think he's surrounding himself by some pretty good people. I think he's radical in some areas, but he's honest, and I think that he's got an honest effort to try to get our health system to where it is, because we're falling so far behind the rest of the world. It's crazy. And it's because of some of these things and some of these research studies and everything else. There's a lot of that stuff that's garbage that they've been studied. And let's get to, I'm on the board of the Clinical EEG and Neuroscience Society. And we had our board meeting on Monday. And, I was talking to them when they elected me to the board. I don't know why they did that. I told them they probably regret it. But I said, what is this romance with studying schizophrenia? I've been in the business since 1997. I've come across 2 valid cases of schizophrenia in 20 years. But at this Toronto, I presented at their conference in Toronto back in October last year. I said, I've had 9 out of the 12 studies that you talk about is schizophrenia. I said, why don't you guys study something we need help with out there in the real world is like anorexia. We don't have a clue what we can do to help anorexics. It's got to be there somewhere, and that's why we need studies in anorexia, not because we come across that all the time. We don't come across schizophrenia. And so I understand that. And so I'm kind of chastising the field because it's mostly professor-bound people, and they're so romanticized with schizophrenia. It's like, you guys have got to stop this. this is nuts. I know it's a great place for drug companies to sell drugs all the time, but there's no reason we study schizophrenia so much and not study what's really affecting us out here in the real world. Something like that, that's a female thing, and they don't want to touch those studies. I don't understand it. So I'm kind of hard on them too, but I'm on the board, so they got their answers.
Yeah. Outside of like anorexia, are there other like areas that you wish we drew more attention to as like as from a research standpoint or from a populist standpoint?
Yeah, there's trying to think of what they call it now. Basically, it's a neurologically messed up brain, and they don't know what to call it. You know this word idiopathic?
Hmm. Mm-mm.
It's a medical term, and Rusty Turner, my primary neurologist I work with on every case, he's got a way to explain what idiopathic pain, for instance. Idiopathic means I don't know.
Hmm.
Put a big long medical word in front of it, and then you can call it that. It means I don't know. And so I think where we are in a lot of things, they don't know, and they're not trying to find out, basically. So they got this neurological new diagnosis they've come up with, and it's basically an idiopathic diagnosis that is kind of like fibromyalgia. There's no explanation. They can't figure it out. So it's a waste basket diagnosis. And it's like, we should be focusing in on the brain. And I got a guy coming in, and a little boy came in with that diagnosis. And so let me tell you, I'm going to do one heck of a report on that, because I want to figure out what is the neurological deficit this guy's having, so we can identify it, so we can come up with a treatment and a prognosis. Throw me a challenge. That's all I want. Throw me a challenge. Say I can't do it.
What do you find is like the most common thing that you see? Is there a particular issue or condition, or like not necessarily symptomology wise, but like when you're actually looking at an EEG that's like very common across the board for people?
Since I see the most difficult cases, the psychotics, psychosis is a tremendous thing. A lot of reason for psychosis. I see a lot of trauma. I see a lot of head injuries. I see a ton of ADHD. In fact, I'm doing a presentation next Monday for an ADD group. It's going to be a Zoom presentation, and it's on ADHD being a diagnosis that doesn't really exist, because my 4 primary reasons for medication failure can all create ADHD symptoms. And medication will not work. And I explain why medication won't work on each type of ADHD. Correctly diagnosed, but again, misdiagnosed, because it's not what, the main reason for somebody having focus and attention issues is not the diagnosis of ADHD. It depends on what we see in the brain. And then we can say, does that account for this set of symptoms? Yes. Okay, we fix this, we fix the symptom. And so autism, ADHD, that's probably what I published in the most. TBI published in. And it's those are the kind of cases, and the ones that most people come in, nobody can figure them out. And that's I call them my zebra cases. They're completely different than anything you expect. And now we got this thing we've had for years, but it's come to light since we find out that COVID can cause POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and mostly in women. It happens mostly to women because they have smaller hearts and smaller volumes. And my cardiologist buddy, who's one of the nation's best, and he and I having a conversation about it at the end of the day. And it's just like, it is a heart issue, but it's producing brain symptoms and balance issues. And they totally respond opposite of every medication you expect. If there's a logical reason for that, as you understand. So it's these things that open themselves up that people go, yeah, I went through COVID and I came out and I had brain fog, and now I've got balance issues, and I go from laying to setting up and I just get dizzy, and it's always, my heart races like crazy. I said, that sounds familiar. I got somebody that can work on that too. So I think that's it. I like the challenging cases. I like the ones that nobody can figure out. I got a team of research assistants. I'll throw it up on our whiteboard like Dr. House, and we'll go through the pieces, and they'll hit the literature, and I'll say, find me a connection between such and such and such and such. And that's how I wrote the last paper. We just are having the finalists today, is because they finally went in. We finally found that trick, that key, that link between spilling excessive beta and neuroinflammation. And that was a big deal. And we got that published. 2 different statistical analysis. One was in machine learning, artificial intelligence. And we got it published. But that was something I wanted to connect, because people understand we've been doing neurofeedback for years, not thinking that the brain's and if we heal the brain, you're going to get limited effectiveness with the neurofeedback. So you got to heal the brain for modulation, rewire it with the neurofeedback. It makes so much sense when you think about logic. In our brain injury patients, doing phenomenal with that approach.
Yeah.
Very recent.
Do you combine anything else with that as well, like hyperbaric oxygen therapy? Or
Hyperbaric oxygen will do the same thing as photobiomodulation for the whole body, which is definitely a key. But hyperbaric oxygen, to do it right, takes a whole lot of training. It takes a whole lot of safety precautions. You heard about the chamber accident in Florida back in January. Some dear colleagues of mine had it blow up and killed a 5-year-old boy. Famous. And then we had recently another accident happen where a physical therapist who had a hyperbaric oxygen chamber operation was in there himself and blew himself up. I'm 72. I don't need to get started on another tangent, but I do believe in this.
Yeah.
I've got a soft chamber that was given to me for research, and I've got it with one of my NFL retired players right now doing it at his house, because it's a 1.3 atmosphere soft chamber, much less dangerous than everything else. But I love hyperbaric oxygen. I think it's great. Photobiomodulation, I think, is amazing, because it only works the brain, but the brain is what I'm after. If it's in the body, there's a lot of ways to treat inflammation in the body, but not always in the brain.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I was thinking about really early on that you talked about was, you've obviously been such a pioneer for so much of this industry, and you've challenged so much of the norm with your research and whatever you've come up with discoveries and fought for those things. And early on, you had mentioned almost that, everybody kind of just tells you that you're crazy when you're believing things that are not yet established science. Like, how did you mentally and emotionally continue to, I guess, believe in yourself, what you were seeing, and not kind of just succumb to that noise?
Well, more I got to know and more I got to realize about the diagnosis of ADHD, and again, back to the brain. I'm not your traditional ADHD, but one thing is about people like that is no doesn't bother. People discounting them doesn't bother. We are true adventurers. We are the people like Christopher Columbus had to be ADHD because nobody in his right mind would sail off the end of the earth, not knowing what was on the other side. So, that's kind of been my thing, is that doesn't bother me. I kept going back over and over again to my psychiatrist I was working for when I first started doing EEGs, and I said, Dr. Walker said it's, this spike and wave activity is pretty serious, and, the medicine you're using probably is lowering seizure threshold, making it worse. And he got mad at me. Don't think you're a medical pediatrician. Don't do that. I just want you to start a neurofeedback program. Did I let that bother me and stop? Nope. I kept coming back to him. He finally said, okay, I'll try an anticonvulsant. Okay. And it worked. That story had a whole trek down there. It's got to be a junkyard dog. Don't give up. If you believe in something, keep pursuing it. Persistency. I used to run an inpatient psychiatric unit for 4 years, 3 months in a day. While I was still in grad school, while I was still in fire department, doing 2 jobs. And I had this one group. I was doing group therapy, but one group, and I saw this old man. He was a senior guy. He was probably my age, in his 70s, but I was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I said, what's the most important lesson you ever learned in life? Because I had a bunch of young people. He said, persistence. All the things in the world, persistent. If you want something, never, ever, ever get up. You'll eventually make it. I thought that was really, really great advice. I learned so much from those patients, and people think they can't learn from patients. I had this one old man stand up in group one night. He said, he was about 6'4", 280 pounds, big overalls, a beard. He looked like Santa Claus in big overalls. He said, Dr. Ron, life is like driving a truck. I said, oh, man, this is quite good. I kind of had a pen and paper. He said, the past is in your rearview mirror, your present's in your seat, your future's out your windshield. And when you focus always in your rearview mirror, you're going to crash. That's brilliant. And so I always remember that story. You know, yes, the past is there to keep us from making the same mistake again. We don't need to focus on the past. We can only change today, but we have to go driving. How do you drive? A few feet in front of your vehicle into a destination, short-term, long-term goals. Makes total sense. But what bogs up your windshield? There's a lot of things. Drug and alcohol, anger, all this other kind of stuff can fog up your windshield, so you can't even see the short and long-term goals. So, you know, I've used a lot of things that patients have told me over the years because it makes a lot of sense when you put it more into a metaphor-based approach to talking to somebody, because it makes sense to me. It does. You know, don't focus on the rearview mirror. You can't see, you can't drive effectively, and you can't go to a destination if you're always focused on.
No, that makes a ton of sense. Dr. Ron, this has been like an absolutely wonderful conversation to have with you. One of the last questions I always ask my guests is, if you were going to ask the question to the audience, something that might change their perspective or have them think about something in a different way, what would that question be?
I don't know if it'd be as much as a question, just make a piece of advice. There's an intention with life. It may not be about you. It could be about one of your kids, could be about future generations. Who knows? But there is an overall plan, and you're a piece. And look for the opportunities every day to make a difference somewhere. And I think it will change your life, because people right now are so isolated. They're so self-centered. They're so like a black hole. We've got to really see that that's not the way to live. And I do think that if people looked at that and questioned themselves, what are my motivations? You know, and if you look for the beauty in life, find it. If you look for the bad, you'll find it. Yep. So I would rather choose to look for the beauty, and I kind of just think that the ones that are not acting appropriately are just at an earlier stage of development. They got long lessons to learn. It's not to be taken. There was a book I read, got me back from my Vietnam experience, really set me on a different path. It's 2150 AD by Thea Alexandra. Phenomenal book. Out of print, can't find it. I bought the last copy, but I've given it tons of papers, tons of books to patients over the years. But it's that about the macro way of looking at life. You know, it's got to be truly what comes from inside. You can't fake it. It's just got to be honest. And it makes a difference. Mothers in their homes are the most critical person to the family. Because like my daddy taught me, when mama's not happy, nobody's happy. Let me tell you, kids can sense this tremendous. And it's a feeling that goes throughout the family. So I'll do everything I can to take care of moms, because they're the most important person in the whole con they're working.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that, because I just, I had Dr. Othmer on, who essentially said the same thing, and as well as Dr. Taylor, blanking on her last name right now, but was talking about like this bee research where they were showing about how like the way the bee brains are all like interconnected, and how when the queen is like stressed, the entire hive is just in a mess, right? And it would make sense that very much the family life is that way as well.
That's funny. You don't know this about my past, but I used to be a beekeeper. No way. I love bees. They're so smart and so great, and they're so easily worked with. I used to go get swarms and everything else. They were my babies. That's always like. But yeah, I decided I would get into beekeeping because we had some land and had some plants that needed me. And we Sears and Roebuck, you can buy anything from them back then. I order the bees, get the hives, assemble hives, make the bees, get the honey, and it was wonderful. But yeah, bees are so well developed and work so well together. It's just phenomenal. But yes, I agree with him.
Oh, beautiful. Well, this is a great way to end, Dr. Ron. Thanks again for coming on the show. And anywhere you want to send people if they want to find out more about you.
We got a website, www.h as in Houston, N as in neuroscience, braincenter.com. That's hnbraincenter.com. info@hnbraincenter.com is my office email. So glad to have a conversation with anybody. You got something to talk to me about, I'll do it. I've got a 45-minute drive, 45-minute drive home. I love these. They're so smart and so great, and they're so easily worked with. I could take calls and do free consults on the way home because I got hands-free, and it's working on that stuff. Just calling, don't sit there and wish you knew more about it. Just figure it out. And a lot of the narratives can help me point you in a direction. And I know enough neurofeedback practitioners and EEG, QEEG people throughout the country. Wherever you are, I can find somebody to collect the data, and we can actually run the data and come back with a report. I don't need to see you in the office. I just need to see your brain. I need to see the EEG and get a good history and everything else, and we can go from there. So I'd be glad to help anybody out there, especially the most difficult case. If you've been down that path for years and nobody can figure it out, that's the case I wanted to see.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Dr. Ron. It's a pleasure to talk with you, and we'll have to talk again soon.
Thanks a lot. And I'll stay on like you said.
All right, ciao. Perfect. Appreciate it.